Perfect.
This is a long chapter.
It is a long chapter, but we are going to talk about it all because it's actually just a couple of hours of what happened. So it's a pretty long chapter, but it only covers a couple of hours in the life of Daniel. All right, so if you remember last week, for those of you that were here, we talked about Daniel 4. And now this is very important that we connect Daniel chapter 4 and Daniel chapter 5. So in Daniel chapter 4, Nebuchadnezzar is told through a dream that he is going to be brought down low, okay, because his pride has gotten in the way, and so he's going to be brought down low. And then it actually happens, okay? So he becomes like an ox for 7 years, and God protects him, and then his reason returns to him, and he is restored. And what we found out through history is that God then gives him an additional 14 years of reign and rule, okay? Because he is able to understand that God is the God above everything else, okay? And so the last verse in chapter 4, verse 37 says, "Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and exalt and honor the King of heavens, for all his works are right and his ways are just. And those who walk in pride he is able to humble." And what I teased last week is we are going to hear those words echo through history, okay? We're going to absolutely tie that chapter to Daniel chapter 5, okay? So when we come to Daniel 5, Nebuchadnezzar is no longer king, okay? He is not the king of Babylon anymore. And we have about 22 years that have passed, okay? So if you remember, at the end of chapter 4, Daniel was about 54 at the end of those events, okay? 58. He was 58. He was about 58 years old. So now 22 years have passed, okay, and he's about 8 now. Okay? Yes, I did. Thank you. All right, so how did we go from Nebuchadnezzar to what we see in verse 1? King Belshazzar made a great feast for 1,000 of his lords and drank wine in front of the thousands. Okay? Belshazzar, when he tasted the wine, commanded that the vessels of gold and of silver that Nebuchadnezzar his father had taken out of the temple in Jerusalem be brought. Now the kings and his lords and his wives and his concubines might drink from them. Then they brought in the golden vessels that had been taken out of the temple, the house of God in Jerusalem, and the kings and the lords and his wives and his concubines drank from them. They drank wine and they praised the gods of gold, silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. Okay? So how did we get from Nebuchadnezzar to King Belshazzar? Actually, we're talking about 22 years of history that have passed. Okay, so it's not a direct descendant here. All right, so we learned, I'm going to try to start writing on this side. We learned about Nebuchadnezzar's reign, okay? And he reigns for about 43 years, 43, 44 years. We have a little bit of discrepancy just because Babylon was weird about the way they ordered things. But we have about 43, 44 years, okay? And so Daniel is 58 at this time, at the end of Nebuchadnezzar's life, okay? After Nebuchadnezzar, his son takes over. And his son is El-Marduk. Okay, remember this is their god, who they like to throw in names. Okay, he is called Evil Marduk in the Jewish history in 2 Kings 25 and Jeremiah 52. So if you study those passages, the evil Marduk that they're talking about, this is this guy, and he was pretty bad. Okay, but he only rules for 2 years. He's only on the throne for 2 years, and then he's assassinated by his brother-in-law. Okay, so his brother-in-law takes over, Nergalazar. Okay, and he is talked about in Jeremiah 39. Okay, he only reigns for about 4 years, and then he dies of natural causes. Okay, his son takes over. Don't you love these Babylonian names here? La-bo-ro-sor-kad. Okay. But he's very, very young. He's about a child here, and he actually has a diminished mental capabilities. Okay, so he's not really fit to reign. He's too young. He has a lot of mental issues. So he only reigns for about 9 months on the throne. And then he's actually beaten to death by a gang of conspirators. So the gang of conspirators says he's not really fit to reign, and they actually club him to death and beat him until he dies. Okay? So then this group of conspirators, they put one of their own on the throne. Nabonidus. Okay? So he gets to be king. Now he actually reigns to be king for 14 years. Okay? Until eventually, after 14 years, we have Cyrus the Great. He's Persian, who comes and takes over Babylon. And this happens as 539 BC. Okay? This is what history tells us what happened. Okay? So we're going from Nebuchadnezzar all the way until this moment. But you see this history that we have labeled. We know about this person, we know about this person, we know about this person, we know about this person. This is where Babylonian history stops. Okay? This is where the record stops. And we know that Cyrus the Persian comes and takes over Babylon. Okay? But I don't want you to get tripped up here of why the Bible cuts out all of this. Okay? So the Bible text is a historical narrative. So what it is doing is it is tying together Daniel 4 and Daniel 5. Okay? So it's tying these two events together. So it is not a historical line-by-line documentation. Okay? This is not a historical account of each and every single line of Babylonian history. This is historical narrative. We're going to take what happened to Nebuchadnezzar at the end of his life, and we're going to find out what happens to the Medes and the Persian. Okay, so don't get tripped up here. A lot of people get tripped up here. Don't get tripped up here. It's like if you read the Gospel of Mark, Jesus' ministry lasted like a couple of weeks, like according to Mark. Because he's like, and then he goes here, and then he goes here, and then he goes here, and then he goes here. It's like 3 years worth of stuff. They condense it down into just the important facts. Okay? So the history is skipping over all of these things right here. Okay? So we're about right here. We're at the end of his reign. Okay? And for a long time, historians and archaeologists wanted to discredit the book of Daniel because of this. Because in Babylon history, this is the last king of Babylon. They have no mention of Belshazzar. Okay? They don't know what happened to Belshazzar. Okay?
So he's somewhere in between the last king there and Cyrus.
Right. So we're right here. Okay? So they thought that they truly believed that this was the last king of Babylon. It is recorded time and time again, this name and the last king of Babylon. Okay? But during the last couple of years of his reign, he was not in Babylon. He had actually moved to Arabia. Okay? And he was reigning from Arabia, but he left Babylon in the charge of his son, and his son is Belshazzar. Okay? So Belshazzar is in Babylon while his father is in Arabia. Okay? His father is fighting a war against the Persians and the Medes. Okay? So he leaves his son Belshazzar in Babylon. Okay? This evidence actually didn't come out until 1854. Okay? So until 1854, people wanted to discredit the entire book of Daniel because it talks about Belshazzar. Okay? In 1854, we find a cylinder that has a recording from Babylon tying Belshazzar and his father not only together as father and son, but that they were co-ruling and reigning for a couple of years. Okay? So all of this information comes out when this cylinder is found in 1854, that the biblical history is actually true. Daniel 5 is proven absolutely true that this king was in Arabia and he had left his son in charge of Babylon. Okay? And that they were co-reigning at the time because he went off to deal with the Persians and the Medes. Okay? So we proved Daniel right. Now you can see this is still on display in the British Museum today. You can go to the British Museum and read that scroll, and it's there today. Okay? So they are co-reigning, and at this time, he is actually has been captured by the Persians, okay? In Arabia, he has been captured by the Persians, and now the Medes and the Persians are in Babylon surrounding it, okay? So we have Babylon, right? And the army of the Medes and Persians are basically surrounded Babylon. They're heading towards Babylon and they're going to take down Babylon. So this is where we are right now, okay? This is where Daniel chapter 5 verse 1 picks up, okay? Now, it's kind of...
We're in the 14 years.
The last year. We're in the very last year. Yep. We're in 1539 right now. Okay. Yep. Okay. Great question. So we have Babylon, the city, and this is where Belshazzar is, and he's throwing a feast. And you're like, wait a second. If he knows that these armies are surrounding his city, why is he throwing this feast? Okay. He has absolute confidence that they're not going to get into Babylon. Okay. Let's talk about this confidence. The outer walls of Babylon were 17 miles long. So they had 17 miles worth of walls. Okay? These walls were 22 feet thick, and they were 90 feet high. Okay? Humongous feet. They also had guard towers that were an additional 100 feet high above the 90 feet. So 190 feet high towers for the guards. Their whole gates were made out of bronze. Okay? They had a system of inner and outer walls, okay, that in moats that was very, very hard to traverse if you were coming from the outside. And they had enough food and supplies that they could hold up for 10 years. They didn't have to depend on anyone outside of Babylon. So knowing that there was an army surrounding him, he's looking at all of this. He's like, there's no way they're getting through. We could sit here and feast for 10 years and we'll be absolutely fine. They'll get tired of us by then and they'll want to go somewhere else, right? They're not going to sit around for 10 years trying to get into Babylon. Okay? So Belshazzar and all of this Babylonian pride, he decides to throw a feast. Okay? Now, in verse 2, it says that Nebuchadnezzar is his father. Okay, now this is not meaning that he is his direct father. We know who his direct father is. This is the general term for ancestor, or the person who sat on the throne before you. Okay, so it's just this general term, but we're going to see it a lot. Daniel's even going to call Nebuchadnezzar his father. It's not his father, it's his ancestor. Okay? So, the scene that I want you to put in your brain that we're getting ready to describe, imagine you're in Babylon and you've been invited to this great feast, but there's this massive army that is literally surrounding your city, and they're coming for you. Okay? So this is what I want you to place in your mind right now. Belshazzar is foolish enough to just lose absolute self-control at this party. He is drunk beyond drunk. Okay? And he decides that his cups that he has are not good enough. So he calls for someone to go into Nebuchadnezzar's storehouse and go get the cups that we brought from Jerusalem. Listen, they're made out of gold, they're great, they're pretty. Go bring them, we're going to drink out of them. Okay, so he has completely lost all self-control at this party, and he wants to mock the God of Israel. Okay, this was probably done to kind of rally his troops because they had had victory over Jerusalem. We're going to have victory over the Medes and Persians. Okay, so this was kind of like a morality, let's boost morale here. Okay, so he calls in he has his wives and his concubines and his lords, and he's got 1,000 people in the palace having this huge party. Okay, so they bring out the cups from Jerusalem and they start drinking them, and it says in verse 4, they drank wine and praised the gods of gold, silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. So that's all their gods. Okay, they're having a feast to all of their gods. And verse 5 says, immediately the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall in the king's palace opposite the lampstand, and the king saw the hand as it wrote. Okay? So, sometimes God likes to demonstrate something in very unusual ways, in very unexpected and very shocking ways here. Okay? all of a sudden, this human hand, okay, think, the hand, running around with Adam's family, this is what's happening, okay? Just a hand, nothing else, comes and it writes in the plaster on the wall. And it starts scribbling these words on the wall, okay? And everybody goes, oh my gosh. Now, it says that it's opposite the lampstand. This could be the lampstand from Jerusalem. This could be the lampstand from the temple that they also brought to mock God, okay? Or it could just be a regular lampstand, but what is happening is, if it is opposite the lampstand, the light is just bright shining. So God puts a spotlight on the words. He could have written anywhere in that palace, right? And he chooses right in front of the lampstand to make everybody see it, okay? This is where we get the proverbial phrase, the handwriting on the wall. You heard that? This is exactly where it comes from, okay? This is where it started, the handwriting on the wall. All right, so let's jump into verse 6, okay? So imagine you're at a party, right? You're drinking, you're having a great time. All of a sudden you see a big old human hand writing in the wall, okay? This is what happens, verse 6. Then the king's color changed. I bet it did, right?
What color? There
He
was
went
no color.
white, right? All the color drains out of his face. And his thoughts alarmed him. Okay, there's alarm bells going off in his head. His limbs give way, his knees knock together. Okay, right? Can you see this big old guy right here? He's just shaking. He is absolutely terrified. He's sobering up in this moment. Probably thinking, is this a hallucination? And seeing everyone else saying the same thing he's saying, okay? He is absolutely just falling to pieces. This is a vivid description that we're getting about how terrified this king was, okay? Verse 7, the king called loudly over 1,000 people who were probably screaming and terrified too, to bring in the enchanters, the Chaldeans, and the astrologers, okay? We're gonna call in the wise men. We're gonna call in our council of people again. And the king declared to the wise men of Babylon, whoever reads this writing and shows me its interpretation shall be clothed with purple and have a chain of gold around his neck, and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. This is confirmation once again, because he could not give second place. Because what? He was second place. Okay? So this is confirmation once again. His father was in first place, and he was in second place. The only title he could give was third. Okay? Okay, so he says, if you can tell me what this says, and you can tell me the interpretation of it, I will make you third in the kingdom. Okay? In verse 8, then all of the king's wise men came in, but they could not read the writing or make known to the king its interpretation. Then King Belshazzar was greatly alarmed, and his color changed, and his lords were perplexed. Okay? So he brings in all of these wise people, all of these wise counselors, and they tell him, we can't read this, and we can't tell you what it says, okay? And he is alarmed at this point because he knows something is really, really wrong here, okay? All right. But we are going to see that Daniel can interpret these words. And it really doesn't seem too hard to figure out once you know what the words mean, okay? It could have been that God deliberately puts a veil over all these people's faces, or it could have been that he wrote in Hebrew.
I was going to ask, did he write in Hebrew?
It is very possible that the words were written in Hebrew, and they're Babylonians. They didn't bother to learn Hebrew, okay? So it could be that he wrote in Hebrew. All right, so let's move on to verse 10. Then the queen, because of the words of the king and his lords, came into the banquet hall, and the queen declared, O king, live forever. Let not your thoughts alarm you, or your color change. There is a man in your kingdom in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. In the days of your father, light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods, were found in him. And King Nebuchadnezzar, your father the king, made him chief of the magicians, enchanters, Chaldeans, and astrologers, because an excellent spirit, knowledge, and understanding to interpret dreams and explain riddles and solve problems were found in this Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar. Now let Daniel be called, and he will show the interpretation. Okay? So who is this lady? This lady is probably the queen mother. Okay? This is probably his wife. So his mother. Okay? Because we're told up in verse 2 that he had called his wives and his concubines, and that this woman comes later in verse 10. So she's not part of what's going on in the palace at this time, so she's probably called in later. So this is probably his mom. But she knows who Daniel is, and she tells him his name, Daniel. Okay, so she has at least respect for his Hebrew name, okay? Because she says, Nebuchadnezzar called him Belteshazzar, but his name is Daniel, and he can interpret dreams, he can solve problems, he can understand riddles, and the spirit of the gods is in him. Okay, so obviously these people are not worthy. Okay, you need to call Daniel. Okay. All right. So we kind of figure out, like, if all of these wise people are called and Daniel's not, where's Daniel at? Remember, Daniel's 80 at this point. He's probably semi-retired. He's still probably holding a position, but not very active in what's going on. Okay. So he's probably semi-retired at this point. He's old. He's ready to head back to Jerusalem. You know, he's getting on the older side. So the queen says, call in Daniel. Verse 13. Then Daniel was brought in before the king. And the king answered and said to Daniel, are you that Daniel? You are that Daniel, one of the exiles of Judea, who the king my father brought from Judea. I have heard, who did he hear it from? His mom. I heard from my mom, because he doesn't know who he is, right? I've heard that you have the spirit of the gods in you, and that light and understanding and excellent wisdom are found in you. Now the wise men, the enchanters, have been brought in before me to read this writing and to make known to me its interpretation, but they could not show me the interpretation of this matter. Okay? But I have heard from my mom that you can give interpretations and solve problems. Now, if you can read the writing and make known its interpretation, you shall be clothed with purple and have a gold chain around your neck and shall be third ruler in the kingdom. Okay? So he's reiterating to Daniel what he had told all of his wise men. Okay? You can tell me what this says, you can tell me the interpretation of it, I'll make you third in the kingdom. Okay? This is the promise that he gives them. Okay? So when everything was going great, when we're having this big old party, right? We're mocking God, we're having a great time, we're eating, we're feasting, and then all of a sudden, this hand shows up. Okay, now we gotta call in Daniel. We gotta figure out what in the world is going on here, right? These people are absolutely panic stricken, and they're gonna call in the one person who can divine between God and the divine. Okay? Alright, so verse 17 says, Then Daniel answered and said before the king. Okay, you ready for this bold Daniel? Here's what he says. Let your gifts be for yourself. Okay, remember, Daniel's 80 at this point. He said, I don't want your gifts. I don't care about them. And give your rewards to another. Nevertheless, I will read the writing to the king and make known to him the interpretation. O king, the most high God gave Nebuchadnezzar, your father, kingship and greatness and glory and majesty. And because of the greatness that he gave him, all peoples, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him. Whom he would, he killed. Whom he would, he kept alive. Whom he would, he raised up. And whom he would, he humbled. But when his heart was lifted up and his spirit was hardened, so that he dealt proudly, he was brought down from his kingly throne, and the glory was taken from him. So Daniel is pointing back to chapter 4. Okay, so this is where we see this tie here. That's why we skipped over some of this unnecessary history. Daniel's tying back to what happened to Nebuchadnezzar. Okay? His glory was taken from him. He was driven from among the children of mankind, and his mind was made like that of a beast. His dwelling was with the wild donkeys. He was fed grass like an ox, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, until he knew that the Most High God rules the kingdom of mankind and sets over it whom he will. Okay? And you, his son, Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, though you knew all of this. So Daniel is point blank telling him, you should know your history. You should know what happened to Nebuchadnezzar. Okay? Because as a king, you're supposed to study all the kings who came before you and how they succeeded and how they failed. So he's telling him, you should know better.
You should have listened to the Chaldeans some more.
Right? Absolutely. You should have listened. You should know better. Okay? So he's telling him, this is what God did to Nebuchadnezzar. Okay? He's getting ready to do the same to you, but you're not going to have 7 years like Nebuchadnezzar had. Okay. You, his son Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, though you knew all of this. But you had lifted yourself up against the Lord of heaven, and the vessels of his house has been brought in before you, and you and your lords and your wives and your concubines have drunk from them. And you have praised the God of silver and of gold and of bronze, iron, wood, and stone, which do not see or hear or know, but the God in whose hands is your breath, and whose are all your ways you have not honored. Okay? Daniel is pretty bold for an 80-year-old guy, right? He has no problem telling King Belshazzar what's going on.
You can feel that. I mean, he's probably not even yelling this. He's probably just very calmly, but you feel ashamed almost.
Yes, you
just
feel
hearing this, you
the
feel
assertion.
ashamed.
Yes, exactly. But this is in contrast to how Daniel was in Daniel 4. Remember, he was absolutely terrified to tell King Nebuchadnezzar about the interpretation because he was so broken over his friend Nebuchadnezzar. He was like, may this happen to your enemies. I don't want this to happen to you. And yet now we have Belshazzar, and he's like, look, dude, you have not humbled yourself before God, and God's getting ready to deal with you, okay? Daniel has no problem. He is obviously not impressed with this guy, okay? Absolutely not impressed with this ruler at all, okay? Very harsh, very clear, very direct, and he tells them exactly what's going on here. You have defiled God's temple items, and he's getting ready to judge you, okay? All right, let's go on to verse 24. Then from his presence the hand was sent, and the writing was inscribed. Okay, so Daniel's still telling him this is the hand of God, and this is the writing that was inscribed. All right, so we're going to talk about the handwriting on the wall. Trying to make sure that the camera's going to see it. Men. Tickle. And then some interpretations are different here. Mine says person. Some say Uparson, some say Perez. Okay, so we're going to talk about that. But these are just 4 words that are described on the wall. Most likely probably in Hebrew, okay? So he tells them what the words read, and then he's going to tell them the interpretation of verse 26. This is the interpretation of the matter. Mean, God has numbered the days of your kingdom and brought it to an end, okay? So this word means numeration, okay? It's a measure of weight or being numbered, okay? So this means numbered, okay? Verse 27, Tico, you have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. So this is a weighing term, a balancing term, okay? Numbered, weighed, okay? 28, Perez, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians, okay? This word means division, but it literally means to tear in two. We have the Medes and the Persians, okay? And they have a combined army that is surrounding the city at this moment. And Daniel tells them, numbered, your kingdom has been weighed and is getting ready to be divided in two, okay? This is what he tells the king. So this mighty army is literally standing outside the gates of Babylon, and they're trying to find a way in as this party is happening. This whole army is outside, being led by King Darius and King Cyrus, okay? And they're heading towards it. Now, it could have been in history that God would have allowed this army to just infiltrate Babylon. But what we actually find out is that Babylon falls from within, okay? The armies of the Medes and the Persians, they could not get in here. They could not surpass all that Babylon had to throw at them. They could not get through. But what we find out was that God was preparing them to be defeated. That he had weighed and measured the kingdom of Belshazzar, okay, and found it lacking. And he was getting ready to divide it. Okay. So Herodotus, he is a Greek historian, okay, and he tells us exactly how this went down. Okay. So there was a river that flowed into Babylon. It's an offshoot of the Euphrates River, okay? And what happens is that Cyrus and Darius, they divert this river into a nearby swamp, okay? So they make it dry up leading into the city of Babylon. Okay, so they work and work and work, and they reroute this river. Okay, but this just lets them get inside the walls. Okay, they still got to get past bronze gates. Okay, well, that would be pretty hard. You know, they could get in there and they would come up against these gates. But what happens is when they get in there, they walk through this dry riverbed, they get into the city, and they find the gates are unlocked. Could you imagine? Who's
on the job?
Who's sleeping on the job? These incredible bronze gates that had kept out enemy after enemy after enemy were unlocked that night. We don't know why. We don't know if God unlocked them. We don't know if he let them be unlocked. We have no idea why. But Cyrus and Darius tell us that when they got to the gates, they were trying to figure out a way to get around them, and they discovered they were unlocked. Okay? So they had been left unlocked that one night.
Who just goes, should we just attempt to see if they get
And it just opens.
yeah.
It completely opens up, and they get to walk into Babylon. Okay? This is exactly as God had predicted it. Okay? Isaiah 44 and Jeremiah 51 were written 200 years before this night. Okay? And if you go into Jeremiah 51, it goes on for 58 verses about how God is going to take down Babylon. Okay? You ready for this? In verse 7, it says, Babylon was a golden cup in the Lord's hand, making all the earth drunken, and the nations drank her wine, therefore the nations went mad. Okay. 200 years before Nebuchadnezzar, before this night, in verses 36 and verse 37, it says, I will dry up her sea, and I will make her foundations dry, and Babylon shall become a heap of ruins. 200 years before this night. But my favorite, my absolute favorite, is in Isaiah 44. Verses 27 through 28, God says, who says to the deep, be dry, and I will dry up your rivers? Who says of Cyrus, he is my shepherd, and he shall fulfill all my purposes? 200 years before Cyrus was born, God named him down in Isaiah's writings. Okay? Now, we kind of read the term shepherd and we go, yeah, he's God's shepherd. Shepherd was a term that they would use for their kings, you know, it's a shepherd king term. Oh, but it gets so much better. We have legend, okay, from the Medes and the Persians, okay? There was this king, and we have another fun name. Okay, Astyages. He is the king of the Medes. Okay? But during his reign, he is basically overlording over the Persians. Okay, so there's sort of this like co-ruling, but he's kind of over them. He kind of took them in, but he's allowing them kind of to rule themselves, but he's kind of like their overlord. Okay? So he has a daughter, and he gives his daughter to a Persian prince. And he lets her marry the Persian prince. Okay? So again, this is kind of this relationship, this back and forth between these two countries. Okay? They have a child and name him Cyrus. Okay? So everything's going good, right? We've got diplomatic ties going on here. We have marriage. We're going to combine our two kingdoms. And this baby is born, and it's a boy, and he's going to rule and reign next, right? Well, when he's born, Astyages has a dream. Okay? And in his dream, he is shown that one of his descendants will overthrow him. And he starts getting very afraid. Okay? And he sends out an order to have Cyrus killed. Okay? Cyrus is an infant at this time. He's a baby. Okay? But his chief advisor, Astyages' chief advisor, disobeys the order. Okay? And he goes and he finds a family who had just lost a baby. And he switches the babies. And he gives them Cyrus, and he takes the dead baby back to show him that he fulfilled his order. Okay? So this family then raises Cyrus for 10 years. He lives with this family. Okay? Sort of, yeah. So he lives with them for 10 years, okay? And then he's discovered by his grandfather. He finds out what happens. We don't know how. It might have been the advisor finally told him what he actually did. but he's discovered, okay? So he's ready to kill this 10-year-old. And his advisors go, don't do it, your dream is just insane, obviously it's not gonna come true, it's just a dream, just don't kill the kid, okay? We really need him, we really need this guy, okay? We need this grandson to stay alive, please don't kill him. So he decides, okay, I'm not gonna kill him, okay? In spite of my dream, I'm not gonna kill him, okay? Well, when Cyrus reaches manhood, he's in Persia, okay? So he becomes the prince of Persia. He decides he's gonna revolt against his grandfather. And he leads this huge, massive revolt. Well, his grandfather's not going to take it. He leads an army, and he gets his entire army to go out there and to squash this rebellion down. His army turns on him, and they refuse to fight, and they give up, and they decide to follow Cyrus. And so he is now doesn't have the choice because now he doesn't have an army. Okay, so Cyrus, he has to surrender to his grandson. Now, in all of that, the family that Cyrus lived with for 10 years, they were shepherds. So Cyrus is literally a shepherd. And God called him a shepherd 200 years before all of this goes down. Okay? But he's the prince of Persia. That's what everyone knows him. He's the prince, and then he becomes king. Okay? But for 10 years, he was a shepherd. So God calls him my shepherd. Okay? I'm going to use him. He is going to fulfill all of my purposes. Okay? So that was all 200 years before all of this goes down. So let's go back to our night where the Medes and the Persians are coming to take down Babylon. Verse 29. Then Belshazzar gave the command, and Daniel was clothed with purple, and a chain of gold was put around his neck, and a proclamation was made about him that he should be the third ruler in the kingdom. And we hope that the story ends there, right? That the lights go down and the curtain goes down and everything's great. Ooh, no. Just a couple of hours later, verse 30, that very night, Belshazzar, the Chaldean king, was killed. And Darius the Mede received the kingdom, being about 62 years old. Okay, so Darius, he's a Mede. So again, we still have this relationship going on. And he is co-ruling and reigning with Cyrus here. Okay, so he is given Babylon. Cyrus and him take over it, and then he hands it over to Darius. Okay, he's 62. He's a 62-year-old general of this army. Okay, he gets Babylon that very night. Okay, so remember Daniel, he's 80. Right, he's correctly interpreted this dream. He tells the king, listen, your kingdom is about to be divided in two. Not knowing that the very words that are happening outside this army is infiltrating into these 17-mile-long walls and coming closer and closer into the palace. And Daniel has a proclamation made about him. He has a robe of purple put on him. He has a gold chain put around his neck. And he's now third in the kingdom for a couple of hours. That's all it takes, is a couple of hours. And then Darius comes in and he kills Belshazzar. And he's gone. Okay? And everybody flees in a panic, and Daniel is standing there, having correctly interpreted it, and then watches it happen. Okay? He sees the writing on the wall. He knows exactly what God is getting ready to do. He's standing there with all of his accolades for a couple of hours. And then he gets to witness Darius come in the name of Cyrus, knowing that 200 years ago, because he's studied his scrolls of Isaiah and Jeremiah, and this guy walks in, named Cyrus, and he's going to divide this kingdom in two between the Medes and the Persians. So Daniel sees all of this happen. And every single word of God has been confirmed for him, including the handwriting on the wall that God just wrote. The plaster isn't even dry where he wrote it. And he's watching all of this go down at 80 years old. And you know what he does? He says, thank you, God. Because he knows from his scriptures that Cyrus is the one that's going to deliver them from Babylon. Okay? Jeremiah and Isaiah both said 200 years before this night, Cyrus is going to be the one to rescue you. Okay? And he sees Cyrus walk in a fulfillment of prophecy from 200 years ago. And Daniel's thinking, we're going back to Jerusalem. This is it. We've been in Babylon now for 70 years. Let's go back. And he gets to witness all of this happen. Okay? It was fulfilled, every word, just as God said. Okay? So what we learn from this is that God's word is always reliable and true, despite sometimes what history tells us, right? So for centuries, people did not want to believe the entire book of Daniel because of this one incident right here. And then a scroll turns up. A Babylonian cylinder that tells us that this is absolutely true. Guess what they were trying to hide and erase? They were trying to hide and erase this shame, right? They wanted to erase the memory of this night and of what happened, okay? But God's word is absolutely true and reliable, and history has done nothing but prove it true and reliable every time. But we also need to learn from others' mistakes. As Daniel pointed out, Belshazzar should have known better, okay? He knew what happened in Nebuchadnezzar because Daniel knew. And all those enchanters and sorcerers knew what happened in Nebuchadnezzar. And they were also trying to hide it. To try and hide the sanity that happened for 7 years because they did not want to acknowledge Daniel's God. Okay? Pride goes before the fall. So we understand now why Daniel 4 ends the way it does. And those who walk in pride, he is able to humble. And then we have, God is going to humble again another king. Okay? He only gives him one night, and that's it. He does not get all the chances that Nebuchadnezzar has. And Daniel tells him why. Because every time Nebuchadnezzar saw God move, what did he do? He said, yeah, this is true. Daniel's God is right. It was never inside. But he acknowledged, absolutely, that's the God. He knows he can do things, but it never was true for him. So God was giving him this opportunity after opportunity after opportunity, and finally he gets a hold of Nebuchadnezzar, right? And we see from this prideful man that he's not going to bow down to the king of Israel. And God said, that's all right. You mock me, let me show you. Let me show you who I am. I've got a whole army out here that's in my hand, and your very breath is in my hand. And so Daniel told him, your very breath is in God's hand. He only had a couple more left before Cyrus and Darius come pounding down his door and take his last breath. Okay? So we need to make sure that we are paying attention to these previous examples before us. God will not be mocked. If you do not humble yourself, God has no problem doing it for you. Okay? I learned very early on, this is one of my favorite prayers to pray. I heard Beth Moore pray this forever ago. And she said, Lord, help me get down so you don't have to knock me down. And that is one of my absolute favorite prayers to pray. Lord, help me get down so that you do not have to knock me down. Okay? And this is what Babylon and their pride has learned. If you do not get down, God has no problem knocking you down. Okay? Get in. Alright, so at the end of this, we have Daniel, and he's still standing there, right? Clothed in purple, but his title is now meaningless because he can't no longer be third in Babylon. But he's still 80 years old, and he sees Cyrus and Darius coming, and now we're going to find out what happens to Daniel. Because he's still standing here in the middle of all of this now. And now we have these two kings that are going to come and they're going to tear apart Babylon. And they're going to put it in the name of the Medes and the Persians. But Daniel's still there. Okay? Daniel's still there. We're going to figure out what happens to Daniel. And in the very next chapter, we get the famous Daniel in the lion's den. And this is King Darius, who Cyrus gave Babylon to. Okay, so he is now going to be king of Babylon, even though he is king of the Medes, he is also going to be king of Babylon. Okay? And we are going to find out what happens to Daniel and Darius in the lion's den. Remember, Daniel is 80 years old. And by the time of the lion's den, probably 80 years plus.
Well, he still has a lot happening. There's a lot going on. How old is he?
Yeah. And remember, he was 17 when all of this started. So he has seen all of these years in Babylon, and God fulfilling prophecy after prophecy after prophecy, naming names, naming exactly what's going to happen. He gets to Rothschild, knowing God's ultimate goal is for them to get back to Israel. Okay. Alright, questions?
So, in reference with the statue, so he does get to go from like the head to the next person.
He gets to the silver. And remember we saw the arms? There's
Yeah.
2 arms. Yeah, Medes and Persians.
Gotcha.
He doesn't get past that. He
Yeah.
doesn't get to go into the torso. Yeah, he sees the move from gold to silver.
This is
So
chapter
he's
2.
seeing that, yes, that's the
I
only
got
class
it,
I
and I
watched.
have to watch that.
But so he does get to see the next step of that process.
Yes. Yeah. He does get to see that as well. And so he knows.
Did you say torso was wrong or?
Ron's Greece and then
Greece.
Rome.
Rome.
So Greece and then the 2 arms of Rome, the east and west of Rome. Yeah. But we has 2 arms. Medes and Persia is silver. Alright, so we're gonna divide the kingdom into the silver torso with the arms.
And then Cyrus is the king that, so if you watch the movie 300, was that
I haven't
Cyrus
seen.
that went?
There's Cyrus and he's actually Cyrus II, but he's Cyrus the Great. So I haven't watched 300s. I don't know if that's the first Cyrus or the Cyrus.
I'm just trying, because I know
I haven't seen that movie.
it's not historically accurate, I know that much, but
Probably
it's
not.
still a good movie. But it's still a good movie. It's still I mean.
Yeah.
But I mean, they really did, it was 300 that did go up against.
Right. I don't know that history. I'd have to study it. But so this is Cyrus the II, or he's known as Cyrus the Great. But yes, this is our Cyrus in this time period. Yep. Okay. So this is why history is so important to tie it together and to give you that bigger picture of what is going on here. Okay? We have to kind of put all of these pieces into the story to get this big picture. Because otherwise, we just have a party going on. We don't understand why God's so excited about this party that's going on. When you realize there's this army surrounding them and God is opening up the gates for them to come in because he's getting ready to judge Babylon. And like I said, if you go read that in Jeremiah, God goes on for 58 verses telling him exactly how he's going to overthrow Babylon. And it happens exactly the way God says it does. Okay? Alright. Anything else? I like to think that the handwriting was in Hebrew. I think it would be pretty cool that there would only be one person in the whole palace who would be able to read it. And that the queen knew.
Right.
That it would.
Queen knows her history. She knows who Daniel is, right? She's like, I gotta tell you about this guy, right? She's been studying her history. She knows who Daniel is. Yeah, that's my favorite. That the king's just standing there going, I don't know, I asked all my wise people. Nobody can tell me. And this queen walks in, oh son. Let me tell you about a guy named Daniel.
But why do the wise people tell? I mean, that's
Do
kind
you
of.
think that they would have put their jobs in jeopardy? No, king, nobody can read this. Nobody can read this. You think they're gonna go, call Daniel. He's just gonna tell us what has Daniel told them every single time? Judgment's coming, judgment's coming, judgment's coming. There's a king. Nobody knows. Nobody knows. We're just gonna go about our party. We're gonna have some more wine. King, forget about this. Forget about this. Right? We're just gonna go about our day.